Sometimes today we wrestle with the image of light and dark. It's the gospel writer John who loves to use this image that God is of the light, truth is of the light, Jesus is of the light, and then there are those who dwell in darkness. And in the time that it was written, and really for most of our history, this image would have fit so much better with our life experience. We so seldom are truly in the dark. I remember the first time I was on a canoe trip, and I had to pee in the middle of the night, and it was one of our canoe trips that I've been on, which meant that there was not a star in the sky, everything was cloudy, and it rained the entire time, which I think is just standard. And, of course, our tent is under a tree if there were any light. And so, of course, I woke up, I think I was about 12, in pitch dark. And I fumbled for probably a few minutes for my flashlight. And then, of course, you go outside. And if you've seen any scary movie at all, which I'm sure I've seen a few, there's something deeply alarming. Because that flashlight lights up this circle right in front of you, and everything around you is just dark. And the bear is going to come from right over there. So I was constantly whirling around. And I think I can't be alone in this experience. And of course, now there are these hilarious YouTube videos. And I remember seeing one a few months ago where these were people who were visiting Africa and they'd never been there before, and I think they had to go outside to go pee, and so they're out there, and someone brought their iPhone with a little light, and you could see the lights of the eyes of lions in the grass, staring at these poor people, and I think the video person said, I didn't realize what I had filmed until we returned, and we were being stalked by lions. This was the experience of the people in the time of Scripture, and really the human experience up until very recently. Darkness was truly dark, and light was truly light and truly good. Lions are afraid of large fires. Light can keep you warm. It can keep you safe. Anything that was illumined by light was a good thing. And it was a great allegory for community and the health of community. These were very tightly knit communities. And you either did something in the public square, in the sight of everyone, which could be verified as true or false, good or bad. And if you were to do something hidden away from your community, in the darkness, perhaps alone, that was probably a dangerous and frightening thing. People tended to do sinister things out of the eye of the community in the darkness. And so if you were comfortable with truth and comfortable being seen in the eyes of others, you were probably doing a good thing. But that's not our world anymore. We have this new thing called artificial light, which we're really good at making. In fact, we're so good at making it that we have a new phrase called light pollution. Have you all heard of this light pollution? It's a community where there is so much artificial light that you're really never in darkness, and they're discovering that there's a lot of health effects to constantly being in the light. Fatigue, some long-term diseases have been tied to it. When I was mentioning this, after one of our 8:30 parishioners mentioned someone who had come from Japan to Canada, and she went on a canoe trip with him, and he'd never seen the stars. He'd spent his whole life in a very large city in the heart of a Japanese city with a lot of light. He'd never seen the stars at all, and he was deeply alarmed, moved, and frightened by the night sky. Is this an allegory for our society? Perhaps we no longer live in a world where truthful and perhaps good things happen in the light of the community and sinister things happen in the darkness. Perhaps there are things that happen in the light, and there are things perhaps even more brightly lit in artificial light. The word that I might use to describe this effect could be Stephen Colbert's truthiness. something that looks pretty true, it feels true, it's probably true, and it's not at all. I'm thinking about some of the things that are happening overseas whenever we bring up the word terrorism. We are truly in the dark about what is happening, for example, in northern Iraq or in Syria. We are really truly in the dark. We don't actually know anybody right now who is fighting over there. Perhaps we know some who are in the armed forces. They probably aren't allowed to tell us. But for the most part, if you are a citizen living in Syria, from our perspective in Canada, we are in the dark. We don't know what is happening. We've sent soldiers over. We don't really know what we're doing. We know that there's a lot of tribes. There's a lot of different sides. We know enough to know there's probably not the good guys and the bad guys. We don't know what's happening. But what is so alarming is if we put on any station of a television program, they're going to tell us a lot about it. There's a lot of truthiness. Really bright, brilliantly produced, very articulate people are going to tell us about what they think might be happening. And we can watch that for hours, days, weeks, months, until we develop a very sophisticated opinion about what has been told to us. But are we in the dark? So much of the way we're learning now is interpreting artificial lights, colorful lights. We prefer the blue light to the green light, but we rarely talk about what is being illuminated. I heard a great critique of modern politics recently, and they were saying that we spend so much time critiquing the message itself that we spend very little time on what the message is about. Why did the Prime Minister say this? Oh, that was a good game plan because he wants to stimulate his base. And so this is a good strategy for him to bring up this particular message. And then the other side is, the other side responded with this, and that's an interesting strategy because their base is this. And so perhaps they're using this color light to describe this thing because these people like that light, and these people like that light. And then this conversation goes back and forth and back and forth. What are they actually talking about? Perhaps the issue that is being discussed is shrouded in darkness. Perhaps the issues are shrouded in darkness because the things that they're talking about are really scary. There's a discussion group talking about Jean Vanier and his life and his ministry, and he talks at length about the energy that we'll expend and the time that we will spend not talking to people who are struggling with mental illness. It's really scary. We don't want to have lunch with somebody who is struggling with trying to figure out what is real and what is not, someone who's hearing voices. We find that really frightening. Jean Vanier spent his life living with these people, some people who were very severely disabled, so he would help bathe them and clothe them. These large communities are about people who are able-bodied and people who are wrestling with different challenges living together as a community. He spent his life teaching about how society reacts to people that we would deem frightening. People who we have placed in the dark. People that we don't want to shine lights on. Or perhaps we create an artificial light, a caricature of what someone with mental illness might be like. Something that's easy to understand, something maybe on a television show, someone who's done some terrible crime. There's a lot of us that can tell a lot of artificial light stories about mental illness. We all have a great story about a scary villain from a movie. But how many of us have had lunch at a community like L'Arche? It's very different. Food's really important. Probably the most important thing there. Lunch is phenomenal and exciting. It's the same thing, perhaps, with cultures. We've created such fascinating, brightly illumined, artificially lit cultures that we like to critique. We've done a fascinating job of illuminating Islam in a certain way. That has a very bright, artificial light on it. We have a lot of opinions about it. I don't know how many Muslims we know, but we can say a lot about Islam. It's so frightening because I think we've been accustomed as a people, as a species perhaps, to trust things that are brightly lit. We trust things that are in the light. For tens of thousands of years, if someone was comfortable proclaiming something in front of the entire community, brightly lit, in front of a great and roaring fire, they must be truthful. How else could they say something in the sight of God and in the sight of the community? How could they say that so clearly if they weren't telling the truth? My concern is we're living in a culture and a society where for some reason we're very comfortable watching someone not tell the truth in a really interesting way. And we're all very good at critiquing the way that they did it, and perhaps they could have been truthful in a different way. Or I'm worried that it's sometimes very difficult to know what is the truth and what is not, when everything is so brightly lit. Perhaps that's one of the appeals of our church community. When we all gather together, our community is not measured in who's the loudest, who's the most brightly lit. Was the phrase that I used earlier was the currency of the church is relationships. And relationships move at the speed of trust. I love that phrase. I'm going to keep using it because it's so true. That's our currency here. It's not commercials. It's not bright lights. The currency here is relationship. And we move along at the speed of trust. It's very easy to tell the truth here, I find. And it's very easy to hear the truth. And perhaps that those are the lives we're called to lead and called to live. Live lives where it's very easy for people to tell us the truth. And to cultivate relationships where we can be truthful with others. Perhaps it's no coincidence that some of the people we're frightened of, the people that Jean Vanier was ministering to, aren't very good at lying. I'll kind of tell you how it is pretty much whenever. A few large communities that I visited, it was, I arrived with a big smile and I was kind of nervous, and it's not, a lot of my interactions were not verbal. We played bingo. We played games. We ate lunch. Someone arrived with a big karaoke set and everybody took turns and everybody had a drum. It was actually impossible for me to lie because it wouldn't really have made a difference. I've been here all the time. Well, no, you haven't. Interesting, those communities sometimes are the ones that frighten us. So I encourage you to live truthful lives. Seek the truth. Seek the light. Do not dwell in the darkness or in the artificial light, but dwell in the light. Seek the truth where it wills to be found. Amen.